afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is such an honor for me to be here this afternoon with our distinguished sculptor friend, Richard Hunt, and our three professional colleagues. It's a great pleasure. The reason we're late is because the Applewood Cafe student chefs fed us way too well. And so we were just eating.
Some time passed, and I was invited to come up, take a look at Applewood, the garden, the site, the potential site, and I determined that actually that wasn't a good idea from a variety of reasons. First of all, you disturb what had been carefully developed as a reclaimed site, which is quite different from a kind of lagoon or pond in a city park that's maintained just as a pond. I mean, kids might put sailboats in it, or ducks might be in it, goldfish, but it wouldn't be like having a sculpture in the middle of something that was being restored as a more natural. So we talked about that. She said, well, yeah, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. There were some people on the staff at Applewood, and it was around that point I met Larry here, who's more than anyone around here, been here from the beginning, and we started to talk with others about a site that might be a good place for a sculpture. Another thing was like a concept of what the sculpture might be sort of developed, and what was desirable, thought desirable, sort of changed.
We work with the artist. The artist kind of helps us to get some of the rough dimensions of this thing. We know some of the weights of the piece. So we can sort of develop, and we apply loads, how the wind blows on this thing, and just sort of get some ideas of what type of footing we're going to need to keep this thing from spinning over. So one of the things we're looking at is the foundation, and so that foundation could possibly have to bridge over some utilities. It could be a unique thing. In this case, we were on a hill, and so this particular foundation, instead of just being a box down low, meaning I'm just talking about this little piece here, we had it developed here. So the pier was developed, so we had something to set our piece on. And depending on the sculpture, sometimes those piers may want to go way up in the air. Other times they don't want to see any of that. Want to keep it hidden. It's not going to be part of the sculpture. So we work together just to sort of see what makes most sense or what's visually pleasing with the thing.
We're responsible for overall strategic planning of potential new buildings or reconstructions or renovations within buildings, as well as overall planning of the campus itself. And I've been around long enough at this campus and certainly at other campuses to know that they constantly change. Master plans are developed and then immediately are changed before they even get published.
When I get involved, it's up in the air already and mostly done. If the install is just a week or two out, I may make a trip or two to Chicago and work on the upper appendages and the higher pieces that complete the piece. So I do a lot of cutting and welding and grinding. The finish you see on the piece, the brushed stainless with the grinding, sanding discs, I occasionally get involved with some of that. But I am not an artist. Not on any, my stick figures don't look like stick figures. I am not an artist on any scale at all. So I have no input at all as far as design, how the piece looks when it's finished. That's 100% Richard. But mine is simply the mechanical aspects of welding, grinding, and finishing. So.
What was the most challenging aspect of this particular piece?
Well, we did have, I think, some of the things we had to work through, and I didn't talk about this earlier, but Richard did mention about soil borings. Usually this was a different site because they had reworked Gilly Creek. There was some concerns that we had as far as, when they put the soil back in place, was there any issues with, was there fill? If the soil isn't isn't compacted properly, what'll happen over time is it'll start to settle. So that was one of the concerns that we had with this project, was that, was that fill that was there or not? So they actually did take a few probes, they do little probes into the earth, and we found out that, yeah, no, indeed it was native soils, so that was not a concern. But I think that was one of the bigger issues we had, just we didn't want to have this thing shifting over time where it's leaning like the leaning tower of Pisa or something like that. So we wanted to make sure, that we had some stable earth that we were building on. So that was probably the biggest thing. And, the other stuff is just sort of, working with Richard and sort of developing these things and how it's going to fit, how it's going to be oriented. That's one thing we weren't quite sure. Sometimes, depending on the sculptures, like even this one wants to lean a certain way. So sometimes you orient the foundation in a certain way because it wants to tip one way or the other. So those are some other things you kind of work together. And on our drawings, it was nice because Richard had actually developed, he photoshopped, I think, a sculptural piece into the site. So we actually had that when we were working with him, and it was helpful because we could see how this piece kind of fit, what the orientation was. It sort of helped us understand exactly how this thing, works.
Richard and Ted have both talked about base plates and anchor bolts and how they have to be in the right place and so forth in order for the sculpture to be able to be mounted correctly. One of our questions when we were talking about the installation of the sculpture was, what's the front? Because you can put 12 anchor bolts in a circle, and Richard can cut those holes in his shop in Chicago, but they're not absolutely equal around all 12 bolts, and so there is a pattern to the bolts. So Richard had to make a decision based on his artistic sense of where the front of it is, or what you would call the front, and which direction that front should face.
We will have an exhibition there titled the Richard Hunt, The Art of This Century exhibition. And we're really looking forward to it. Okay.